Hey everyone, welcome to week 5. I'm your instructor Jackie, and this week we're going over design thinking and what that is about, right? What will we be able to accomplish? How do we think critically about design work and also our sketches? So that's what I have here for you. This week is about visual hierarchy, and I just kind of want to go over this a little bit. This is always a good brush up. And yes, no, I've got to change that. It's from, I used to teach at Napa. But so basically visual hierarchy. What is visual hierarchy? It refers to the arrangement or organization of elements within a design in a way that guides the viewer's eye through the content in a specific order of importance. So it's about creating a clear and logical structure that helps users navigate and understand the information. You can use size, scale, color, and contrast. Also typography, thinking of white space, repetition, which is a principle of design, proximity. These are all principles of design. And if you've taken some other classes in digital art with me, it should be kind of apparent, right? They're creating visual elements such as icons, images, textures, and graphics, and what we decide should be at the top versus what we should be at the very tiny little bottom. And how do we design for that when we have a ton of information, right? Sometimes we have too much information, and that's problematic. But then sometimes we only have a header and then a picture, right? So making sure that it's equal in contrast and size and proximity, those are all things to think about in visual hierarchy. And then overall design thinking, So visual hierarchy, hierarchy. I always say air, but it's hierarchy. Controls the delivery of the experience. If you have a hard time figuring out where to look on a page, it's more likely that its layout is missing a clear visual hierarchy. So that is a great one. And the Nielsen-Norman group, I think I've talked about them. Jacob Nielsen is like the godfather of UX. He pretty much invented it in terms of how it is defined today and what the rules are in the systems thinking and design thinking. He has a company called the Nielsen-Norman Group, and he puts out all kinds of things. I'll put a link in here with his work. But building blocks of visual hierarchy. Hierarchy is a visual design principle which designers use to show the importance of each page's screen, contents, and by manipulating all of these characteristics, right? So think about some of these visual design principles, right? Size, color, contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, white space, texture, and style. All of those are some visual design principles that you should be thinking of every minute of when you're designing. And we're getting into the design phase now. And next week you're going to be wireframing. So thinking about all of these things, contrast, color. Why do we use the color blue? Because for people that are colorblind, it's easier for them to see it against a white black background. That's why we use blue as a link. There's a lot of design thinking behind all of the things that we have on our phones, right? We don't realize it, but a lot of people have put a lot of thought into why things are a certain way. How close are things? How far away? How much do we repeat, tables? Or do we when we're selling products, do we only put a 2 up or a 4 up? So thinking about size, what do users notice in larger elements more easily? Think about color. Bright colors typically attract more attention than muted ones. Contrast, dramatically contrasted colors are more eye-catching. Alignment, out of alignment elements stand out over aligned ones. Repetition, repeating styles can suggest content is related. Proximity, closely placed elements seem related, right? They seem close because they're closely placed and they're the same. They seem like they're almost like in a repetitive movement. Like think about shopping or think about, when you're scrolling in YouTube, right? Every video looks the same. It's the same size. The text is underneath. It's the same look and feel. White space. How do we create more white space? That's something I think it's taken me a long time as a designer to really come to terms with because every time I design something, I want to overdo it. And then I realize that the more simple it is, the easier it is for people to use. So making sure you have white space is super important. Texture and style. Richer textures stand out over flat ones, right? Font size and style is one way to establish hierarchy. This is the most important, then this, and finally this, right? You could see how it works. When you're encountering an interface, users react extremely fast, up to milliseconds. I'm talking milliseconds, not even a full second, developing gut feelings about whether to stay or leave. And I can tell you, I do this, I judge everything by their website. If I don't if I go to a financial company and I can't navigate the URLs or to get to my login to look at my, bank account, I'm not going to use them. Why would I use them? Do you think their app's going to be any better? Or do you think if their app sucks, do you think their website's going to be any better? Users' eyes follow predictable reading paths, which are culturally influenced, right? We read left to right. And then and Western users use an F to Z pattern when you read. F to Z, right? So here's the F pattern. So you either go left, right, down, or you go the Z pattern. I think I'm more of a Z person. What kind of person are you? To reinforce these natural patterns and lead users along a cleverly constructed path to a desired goal, or break these patterns to highlight a focal point for users. That's what both of these do. They reinforce natural patterns or they break patterns. So users prefer recognition over recall, hence why it's essential they can scan instead of having to work at reading and remembering things, right? We don't read, we scan on our phones. The Gestalt principles. If we haven't gone over these are principles or laws of human perception. And they describe how humans group similar elements, recognize patterns, and simplify complex images and perceive objects. So designers use the principles to organize content on websites and other interfaces so it is aesthetically pleasing and easy to understand. Here's one of Gestalt principles, emergence. Instead of interpreting each blotch separately, we immediately identify a Dalmatian, just based on how oddly the shapes are put together, right? And there is not an outline of this. It's just dots. Unilever logo is composed of several small shapes, but the letter U emerges from the combination of shapes. So things put together in proximity that are similar color and look and feel. So that's an example. Closure, the Gestalt rule or reification of closure. Right? Do we need closure? How do we enclose things without outlining them? We play with positive and negative. We play with repetition. We play with pattern, right? Just like these two logos. A common region. We perceive elements that are in the same region, that are in the same closed region as one group. To apply this principle to your interfaces, group related objects together in a closed area to show that they're separate from other groups. So in the Interaction Design Foundation, which I use all the time, IDF, this is what they say. 93% of all brand communication is visual, and this highlights the growing importance of the digital designer career. If you're tech savvy and interested in design, becoming a digital designer, learn about these different things, right? We can see the principle of common region applied in the Facebook post. Likes, comments, and other interactions appear with the boundaries of one post, and so stand apart from the other posts. So when they appear with boundaries of the post, it stands apart, right? So we know because they've created this, right? First was the statement, then it's the picture, and this is how everything is on social media, right? At least on Facebook. Continuity or continuation. That is a Gestalt rule. Proximity is a Gestalt rule. So sometimes the Gestalt rules roll over into the principles of design. They're very closely related. A lot of them are taken from that. Here's an example of proximity in a logo, the Girl Scouts logo, right? It's just 3 focus clusters that look like a face. Multi-stability, the Necker cube. In the Necker cube, which is an optical illusion, you can interpret it as a three-dimensional cube with the front face either toward the left or the lower left or the top right. A third interpretation is that intersecting lines create a diamond in the center. Often when we interpret the image one way, we find it harder to see the other interpretations, right? So we've already made up our mind that, like, to me, I already see the cube. I can't really see the diamond. I mean, I can if I look for it, but it's same with this. William Eli Hill. This is like the old woman. Do you see an old woman or do you see a young woman? Can you unsee the old woman? Can you see the young woman? This one I can see both of, but this is a great example of an optical illusion that demonstrates multi-stability. Depending on where you focus, you might see either a young lady looking away or an elderly one looking sideways. Figure ground. That is definitely a principle of design. What's in the forefront? What's in the background? What is... the Rubens vase is a classic illustration that demonstrates the principles of figure ground and multi-stability. If you consider a white background, you see a black vase in the foreground. If you consider a black background, you see two faces looking at each other. Invariance. The Gestalt principle of invariance explains how we perceive basic shapes as identical despite various transformations. These transformations include rotation, movement, size alteration, stretching, different lighting conditions, and variations in parts. This principle is crucial for recognizing faces, for example. Thanks to invariance, we can recognize our friends and family members from afar or different angles, or even when we make funny faces. Pragnans. Pragnans? When we see the Olympic rings, right? We see 5 interlocked rings instead of a C, and then lens shapes. The circles are simpler shapes to process than the C or lens shapes. Pragnans describes the human tendency to simplify complexity. Our environment constantly bombards our senses with stimuli while we have limited attention and processing capacity to handle all the complexity. So Pragnans helps us to see order and regularity in a world of visual competition. Similarity. That's another principle of design. When items, objects, or elements share superficial characteristics, we perceive them as grouped. We can see the similarity principle in branding and design system guidelines, especially for phones. Everything is grouped. Symmetry. Which of these shapes would you group together? Chances are you'll pick the matching square brackets instead of the mismatched curly and square bracket combination. Humans tend to see visual elements as grouped when they are arranged symmetrically. The natural world is filled with symmetry or near symmetry, and our brains tend to favor symmetrical forms. Grid systems that evenly divide the space help designers implement symmetry and order in user interfaces. Google's homepage is symmetrical with almost all major elements center aligned and 2 buttons. The Google search and I'm feeling lucky, right? Like this, back in the day when there were a bunch of search engines, there was like Webcrawler, Dogpile, Metacrawler, Google, everyone was competing against each other. They were all a lot more complicated than Google, which is why Google won. That's why we have Google today, is because it was the most simplified interface for the time. So that's important to remember as a designer, and when you're designing things, the simpler, right? Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle, keep it simple and stupid. Even though we have a ton of information and we're trying to sell people coffee or whatever we're trying to do when we're creating apps and websites, we're still trying to keep it simple and easy and user-friendly for them and for us as the designer as well. Common fate. The Gestalt rule of common fate is a principle that refers to the human tendency to perceive visual elements moving in the same direction or in a unison as grouped. Visuals need not to be moving to convey motion, but cues such as arrows and the rotation angle can indicate the direction of which elements perceive to move, right? Like the loading symbol, that's just one symbol, but we imagine it moving in a circle, just like arrows. That's why we use these very basic design elements. So Gestalt principles are in the mind, not the eye. The Gestalt principles are vital in user experience design. And when you design interfaces, users must be able to understand what they see and find out what they want at a glance. All right, so that is the visual hierarchy lecture. And I want you to, this week, I want you to think about I want you to start sketching what you want your case study to be. So I also posted this in your assignment of a sample, like this is a final product from a former student last year, okay, here in Porterville. So what he did was okay, let me just zoom in here. So this is exactly what I want for your final in this class. For the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks we have, this is exactly what I want. So we did creative brief, we did the competitive analysis, we did the user personas. Now we're doing some sketches, and then we're going into the wireframe, the low fidelity designs, and the high fidelity designs. So you should have these. So I don't want any more PowerPoints. I want you to start getting into Figma and at least make something like this that he did. And what are these? These are just sketches. They're his sketches. They're screenshots. This is something he made, I think, in Illustrator. I remember him doing it. So you are welcome to make it in Figma, or if you have it somewhere else, you've already started like a PowerPoint, grab those slides and put them in here, right? So user personas were due last week. This week, we're working on some sketches. I just want to see lo-fi sketches. I don't want to see you sketching with your iPad. I mean, if you have an iPad and you can, that's great. But seeing it basic like this and just seeing seeing the process, a lot of being a user experience designer is the process. It's not just the final product. It's how did you get from your sketch to that final product? And we have to show people our design thinking. That's what a case study does. It shows you your design thinking. You did think about visual hierarchy. So did he, hierarchy. He's thinking about what his headers are. He's thinking about what his colors are and the logo and how he can redo the logo. And then we get into wireframing, right? Which I'm going to talk about in the next one. But I wanted you to see this so you can understand what I'm looking for, because a lot of you that I see in person are very confused what I'm looking for. And this is what the final looks like. Okay? All right, cool. I hope you're having a good week. I will see you next week. And yeah, can't wait to see what your designs are. Okay, bye.